Hey there, everyone. So glad you could join us today. If you don't know me, obviously, Susie just introduced me. I had an introduction, but that's fine. Mine was short anyway. I'm one of the Seraph Media Director here at God Squad Church. So most of the time, I'm making cool videos and graphics and doing all that sort of thing. But every now and then, have the opportunity to deliver a message for you guys. And I want to start off by saying that I have absolutely loved this Lore of Legends series. If you're new with us today, we've been going through so many different characters in the Bible, looking at what made them legendary and what we can learn from them. And everyone that's spoken for it has done such an incredible job. And it's been so cool hearing all the different perspectives about what makes someone a legend. We've talked about the big heroes like Paul and David, and even some unnamed stars like the armor bearer and the sinful woman. But the legend I felt God leading me towards is probably one of the more iconic characters in the Bible and certainly deserves a place in our Lore of Legends series, but maybe not for the reasons that you're thinking. Some of you may remember Moses as being the one who waltzed into Pharaoh's chamber and demanded that he let the Israelites go, the whole "let my people go" spiel. We remember Moses parting the Red Sea and striking a rock with his staff to produce water in the wilderness. Maybe you remember him simply holding up his arms to win a great battle. And how could we forget him being allowed to be in the presence of God for an extended period of time to receive the 10 commandments and then return to the people with a shining face. His face was literally glowing because he was in the presence of such holiness. Now, if none of that is familiar to you, don't worry, because we're going all the way back to the beginning. Just about. Not the very, very beginning, but just about. We're going all the way back to where his legendary journey began as God called to him through the burning bush. But few of us will remember that in that moment, Moses didn't want to listen to God. If Jonah was the rebellious teenager, Moses was the nervous little middle schooler. He didn't want to go to Pharaoh and demand he let the Israelites go. He didn't want to answer the calling that God had placed on his life because of his insecurities and his fears. But I think we learn more from Moses in those first moments than we do in the rest of his legacy. Out of all the great things he did, we learn more about him in his moment of doubt than we do in any great legendary thing that he accomplished. And more so, we learn about how God responds to Moses' doubt and fear. Moses is what you would call a reluctant hero. And that's the title of our message today. A reluctant hero is a hero that is pulled into conflict by means that are outside of their control. And they have very little choice than to be a hero. Moses wasn't a hero because he wanted to be. He was a hero because he was called to be. And in preparing for this message, I was racking my brain for quite some time trying to think of, what's a character in gaming that was a reluctant hero? So I was literally Googling reluctant heroes in gaming. That's my typing hands. There was a lot of suggestions from games that I haven't played or weren't familiar enough to talk about. Then I finally found one. It was just a no-brainer for me. It was great. And with the third game coming in the series at the end of October, he seemed like the perfect candidate. In the original Luigi's Mansion, Luigi does not want to be a hero, but he doesn't really have much choice. If you're unfamiliar with how the story goes, he basically wins this mansion from a contest that he did not enter. And then he tells Mario about it. Mario goes to meet him there, gets captured by ghosts, imprisoned in a painting. Then Luigi shows up to this creepy mansion. Was not at all what it looked like in the pictures. He's scared for his life. And then this mad scientist gives him this ghost-sucking vacuum cleaner. So what's he supposed to do? Abandon his brother and peace out because he's too afraid of ghosts? I'm sure he'd love to do just that. But through trembling hands, he bravely ventures back into the mansion to save his imprisoned brother. He was a reluctant hero, forced into a situation that was outside of his comfort zone. And to be honest, I think Luigi handles his situation better than Moses handles his. Luigi is the real legend here, but He's not in the Bible. So we got Moses to show us what's up. Let's pick up with Moses' story when God calls to him through the burning bush. At this point, Moses had fled from Egypt some years ago, leaving the rest of his people enslaved to the Egyptians. He's been away for quite some time, and he's currently tending to some sheep out in a field. People always seem to be tending to sheep in the Bible when something crazy is about to happen. Could write a whole sermon based off that. Another day, perhaps. Anyway, Moses comes over to this bush that is on fire, yet it's not burning up. So that's kind of weird, right? And through this burning bush, God speaks to him and explains to him how the Israelites have been suffering and how God has a plan to rescue them from their slavery. And Exodus 3, verse 10 is where we're going to pick up. God is still speaking to Moses, and he says, "So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Moses asks, "Who am I?" He's asking, what qualifications do I have? What makes me the right person to do this? How can I possibly make this happen? Moses didn't think he was the right person for the job, just as Luigi probably wasn't the best candidate to go into the mansion full of ghosts and rescue his brother. Moses doesn't think he can live up to God's calling. But look at God's answer in the first part of verse 12. "I will be with you." God didn't really answer Moses' question, did he? Moses asked, "Who am I?" And God is like, irrelevant. God could have answered that in so many different ways. But instead, he decides to let Moses know that he's going to be with him. And that's all that matters. That's our first point today. And it's so simple. You do not go alone. It's something that many of us understand and believe. But as soon as things get tough, we start panicking. And we forget this simple truth. Especially in situations where God is calling us to do something, we have to believe that God is with us. If he has called you to do it, then he's going to be with you. We should have peace in that. But just like many of us in our limited faith, knowing that simple truth wasn't enough to give Moses the confidence he needed. So let's skip ahead to chapter 4, verse 1, where Moses answers, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me, and they say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Moses is presenting another possibility, trying to get out of the situation. So he's like, what if they don't believe that you have sent me? Verse 2, "Then the Lord said to him, 'What is that in your hand?'" Yes, God just answered a question with a question. He does that from time to time. Moses replies, "It's a staff." The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." So Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake, and he ran from it, naturally. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." This is already pretty crazy, but God keeps going. He's not done yet. Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand in his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become white as snow. "Now put it back in your cloak." So Moses put his hand back in his cloak. And when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." So God gives Moses these 3 miracles that he can perform to prove to the people that what he's saying is real. And you would think after witnessing 2 out of the 3 miracles firsthand, that Moses would be sold. He'd be like, "Okay, all right, I get it. That was pretty crazy. I'm with you." But he's still reluctant. As we go on in verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. So now Moses is making the argument that because of his lack of speaking skills, he will be unable to do the task God is calling him to do. Now, to Moses' credit, this is a very reasonable concern because Pharaoh's magicians were known for being eloquent speakers. And if Moses goes in and he isn't up to snuff, then with his speaking abilities, he's going to get verbally wrecked. So he has a good concern, but he's still trying to get out of the situation by any means necessary. He believes that his weakness is his limit. And that leads us to our second point today, that your weakness is not your limit. We like to hold ourselves back whenever we are challenged to do something outside our comfort zone. Oh, I can't do that. I've never been good at that. I won't be able to do that. You know, a long time ago, I told Pastor Susie, I really don't think I can do graphics. Video is more my thing, but I really don't think I'm very good at doing graphics. To be honest, I don't remember what his response was to that. Maybe he does, but that's not the point here. Because even though I was trying to limit myself by my weakness, there was still a need to be filled in the ministry. We needed better graphics. Some of you know. So I tried anyway, even though I didn't think I was very good. It ended up not being so bad. There's still a ton that I can learn, and I will always believe that video is my strength over graphics. That doesn't mean I can't also do graphics. It doesn't mean I can't keep practicing, getting better, and doing what God has called me to do. It doesn't mean that my weakness is my limit. And while we're at it, guess what else is not a strength of mine? Public speaking. If this wasn't through a screen and I was actually standing in front of all of you in person, I don't know if I could do this whole preaching thing. I would like to try eventually, but to be honest, the thought of it terrifies me. It is so much easier to just sit behind a screen and only have to worry about looking into this camera. I can glance down at my notes every 5 seconds because I can't plan out what I'm saying more than one sentence in advance on the fly. But my weakness is not my limit. In this situation, Moses believes his weakness is his limit. So let's see how the Lord responds to him in verse 11. The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." So God is once again reminding Moses, this isn't about you. It's about me. It's about what I can do through you. But Moses is still afraid. Picking back up in verse 13, Moses says, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." No matter how much God seems to give him, Moses is still afraid. And it's easy for us to look at Moses in this moment and think of how silly it was for him to doubt God. But how often do we do the same thing? Guys, God has told me something 1,000 times, confirmed it over and over again, sent people to encourage me, tell me I'm on the right track. And just because I haven't seen the ending play out yet, I struggle to believe it. I struggle to believe it's going to end up the way that God has told me it will. It's hard, but God is patient. Picking back up in verse 14, it says, "Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses." And I want to stop for a second. I know we just got back to the scripture and read like 6 words, but stop right here and explain this because it's one of those things that you can really get tripped up on if you don't do some digging. So some people may look at this sentence, that God was angry with Moses, and think that God is like this bully that just tells people to suck up their feelings. But that couldn't be further from the truth. We have to remember that, first of all, Moses wrote the book of Exodus. So to his credit, he is accounting for all of his weaknesses and fears in writing all of this. He's not leaving out the embarrassing parts. Secondly, when Moses finally writes this, he can look back and see that this was his responsibility, his calling, and that he was trying to get out of it. At the time, he wanted God to choose someone else. At this point, God had given him miracles and so many words of affirmation. It's more than just fear at this point. It's disbelief. It's a doubt that God can do what he is claiming. In not believing that God can use him, Moses is choosing to believe instead that God is unfaithful. He believes that God doesn't speak truth. And think about that. To believe that someone is not truthful, to believe that they are unfaithful, that's one of the most dishonoring things you could believe about someone. And for Moses to think that about God, who is the epitome of truth and faithfulness, it's dishonorable to God. It's almost insulting. Moses communicates God's anger to us to show the severity of his own unfaithfulness. Doubt is not bad by itself. In fact, God often uses doubt to strengthen us. But when we're faced with such incredible evidence and still we let our doubts dictate our decisions over faith, when we let our doubt influence our view of God's faithfulness, that's what displeases God. And Moses wants us to understand that as we read this. He's putting himself on blast here because he doesn't want us to make the same mistake. And even though his unfaithfulness displeases God, makes him angry even, God still caters to Moses, as we see picking back up in verse 14. And God said, "What about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth, and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it." God may be displeased with Moses' doubt, but he's not taking it out on him. He's supporting him. If God has called you to do something, he's going to give you the support that you need. In this situation, God sent Moses's brother Aaron to help him in his calling. Moses still has to go. Look at that last verse again. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it. I'm sure Moses would have loved to pawn that off on Aaron as well if he could. But God specifies, you will perform the signs. Moses still has to direct Aaron, tell him what to say. But God heard Moses' fear and compromised with him by sending him a helper. Moses gets a helper. Luigi gets a vacuum cleaner. Neither of them could have done what they needed to do without those things. And this goes back to our first point, that you don't go alone. Not only does God go with you, but whatever help and support that you need to carry out your promise, he's going to give it to you. That's why your weakness is not your limit, because God is going to make up for your weaknesses in some way, either by helping you strengthen those weaknesses or giving you the tools and resources to work around those weaknesses. Whatever you need to answer God's calling on your life, whether that be financial support, an assistant, or just people in your life to encourage you, God is going to provide them. God has called some of us to do things that terrify us, things that are outside of our comfort zone, outside of our skill set, but we know in our heart that God is calling us to it. And we're left with a choice. Listen to God despite our own insecurities, despite lack of resources, and believe instead that he is going to provide what we need to see it through, or ignore what he's calling us to because we don't think he can help us. God gave Pastor Susie a call to start this ministry and start this church. And if he had instead said, "No, that sounds ridiculous. I don't think I can do that," none of us would be here right now. But he answered the call despite any fears he may have had, despite everyone telling him along the way that this was never going to work. But he knew that this was his calling. But if he didn't know that, and if he didn't understand the severity of that, none of us would be here. If Moses let his insecurities get the better of him, thousands of Israelites would have stayed enslaved for God only knows how much longer. If Luigi had pieced out because he was too scared, Mario would have been trapped in a painting waiting for someone else to save him for who knows how long. And we all know the Toads weren't doing it. They were crying, scared to death in the mansion until Luigi finds them and turns the lights on. When you clear a room in the original Luigi's Mansion, the lights turn on, and it no longer looks like a creepy mansion. It's just pleasant, looks like a normal room. So you're going through room to room, clearing them, turning the lights on, and you get through probably 2/3 of the game, working your way through the floors of the mansion, lighting up all these rooms, and you're feeling more and more comfortable. You're feeling good. The mansion is less overwhelming and spooky, and it's like mostly cleared now. And 2/3 of the way through the game, you get to a point where all the lights go out in the rooms that you already cleared. The entire mansion becomes dark once again. Ghosts are spawning everywhere in all these rooms that you had once made safe, and you have to figure out how to turn these lights back on. Now, Luigi could have gotten to this point and been like, nope, I'm done. Peace. I'm not doing all that again. Not dealing with this anymore. It's too hard. I'm done. But he didn't. I don't think Luigi gets enough credit here. It's probably easy to see him as this huge scaredy cat and a wimp as he gets scared by every little thing, calls out to Mario like a terrified little child in the grocery store, Mario. But this dude is going so far out of his comfort zone trying to save his brother. He is facing his greatest fears because he has no other choice but to face them. Luigi might be a reluctant hero in this game, and he might not be very brave, but he's doing it anyway, despite the obstacles that he's facing. Let's go back to Moses' story now and see how the next part of his story plays out. After talking with God, Moses finally goes to talk to Pharaoh with the help of Aaron, and he says everything he's supposed to, performs all the signs God gave him. Things don't go so hot. Moses says exactly what God told him to say, and Pharaoh's like, no, I'm not going to let the Israelites go. In fact, I'm going to make their lives worse. I'm going to make their work harder. And yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. And then the Israelites, they turn to Moses and they're like, dude, look what you just did. We were fine and you just made things worse. And Moses is like, capital D colon. Surprise Pikachu face. After that, picking up in Exodus 5:22, we see Moses returned to the Lord and said, why, Lord? Why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. Moses is like, I did everything you said, and now their lives are worse, and they hate me. This is literally the exact opposite what you said was going to happen. He hit an obstacle, and he didn't understand why. I wish I could tell you that whatever God has called you to do is going to be easy. I wish I could tell you that you're going to be able to easily trust him on your journey. I wish I could tell you that everything is going to go smoothly as long as you are following his calling on your life. That's not the case. Pastor Susie gave a message during our loading screen series called The Road of Resistance. And if you're someone who is meeting a lot of resistance, trying to go after your calling, I'd encourage you to go back and watch that message. If you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be a little thing in the corner of the screen to click on. But for right now, I wanted to bring one of Susie's points from that sermon back for this message, because God knows I needed to remember it. And I'm sure some of you do as well. One of his points was, resistance is not a reason to retreat. I didn't actually go back and check if that was it word for word, but I'm like 90% sure. Anyway, for this message, let's change it a little bit so it fits our message better. So let's change it to, resistance is not a reason to be reluctant. There, now I'm not completely ripping off Susie's point. God told Moses ahead of time that Pharaoh was going to resist. Moses just kind of forgot that part, or chose not to remember that part, because he was too worried about how the Israelites hated him now. He should have seen the resistance and been like, yeah, God said that was going to happen. And we forget it too, that we are meant to face resistance, but it's not a reason to be reluctant. It's not a reason to give up. Just because all the lights you've worked so hard to turn on go out all at once doesn't mean there's not still a job to do. And going into Exodus chapter 6 now, the Lord responds to Moses. Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. You know, I wonder if the reason God has Pharaoh say no so many times is because he was trying to teach Moses to rely on him instead of the things he told Moses to do. Maybe Moses still felt like it was up to himself. Maybe he was thinking too much about his weakness instead of realizing that God is not limited by his weakness. But if he couldn't understand that, how is he going to lead the Israelites in the wilderness? How is he going to have the faith to part the Red Sea when all seemed lost? If he could not get this through his head. If God has called us to do something that scares us, something we don't think we can do, something where we have encountered resistance, we have to remember that it is not by our own power that we will succeed. God has called us to it, meaning he will make a way for us. We try our best and we look to him for direction. But at the end of the day, we have to rely on God to move the mountains. We have to rely on God to change the impossible situation that we see in front of us. Moses' calling doesn't have anything to do with him, but instead has everything to do with God. I'm going to say that again. Moses' calling, your callings, they don't have anything to do with you. They have everything to do with God and how he wants to work through your life. It doesn't matter that Moses might not be qualified. It doesn't matter that you're not qualified. It doesn't matter that you're not sure if you're the right one for the job. Moses didn't think he was, but God was with him. He called him to this. And because of that and that alone, Moses was the right person for the job. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. Multiple of our leaders have said that multiple times here at God Squad Church. I think I've even said it before in a previous message, but it's worth repeating because so often we forget. Moses was fully capable of doing this because God had qualified him, because God was with him. And Moses was eventually successful. We see an afraid, reluctant hero become one of the most memorable people in the Bible. We see him become a legend. But he didn't start a legend. He started afraid. He started insecure. But that didn't stop God from calling him, from using him for legendary purposes. Some of you remember in the last message, I shared how I'm waiting on God for something. What I didn't touch on too much last time was how the promise God gave me was not only an answer to prayer, but the confirmation of a calling he had given me 2 years prior. God spent 2 years calling me to something that I wanted nothing to do with. I didn't think the cards lined up. I didn't think I had what it took. I didn't think there was any feasible way to answer this calling. God knows I didn't want to answer this calling, just like Moses didn't want to answer his. But thank the Lord, he didn't give up on me, just as he didn't give up on Moses. And he kept calling me to this idea that I eventually realized was a promise. I was so busy looking at the situation in front of me, so busy accounting for all the variables that did not add up, so busy looking at the obstacles that were ahead that I could not believe that God was definitively calling me to this. I was letting my weakness and my fear be God's limit. And it took 2 years for God to get that through my head that was not the case. I had spent so much mental, emotional, and spiritual energy trying to understand why he was calling me to this, trying to understand what it all meant. And I was so drained, so at a loss, so stressed out. I got down on my knees and I pleaded, God, what do I need to do to get through this situation? And his answer, believe that what I've called you to do is going to happen. And it sounded too simple to be true in the moment. But in order to do that, in order for me to believe that, I had to ignore what I was seeing. I had to trust that God was going to make a way, even though he knew I couldn't make a way. So that's what I did. I spent the last 2 years trying to figure out how I could possibly do what he had called me to do, when I should have been trusting that he was going to do what I couldn't. And he needed me to understand that, just like he needed Moses to understand it. Because only a month later, the very thing he was calling me to looked like it was completely out of reach. Like it was a lost cause. And if I had not first put aside everything in front of me and trusted that God was going to come through, I would have walked away. At that moment where everything looked lost, I would have walked away. I would have given up on the calling. All the lights would have gone out and I would have peaced out if God did not help me realize that it wasn't about me, that it wasn't about the resistance that I had faced, that it was about him. I first shared a bit about this with you guys over 6 months ago now. And we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of God giving me that promise in about 2 weeks. And he was calling me to that promise for almost 2.5 years prior to that. And guess what? Still not been able to answer that calling. Still don't think I have what it takes. Sometimes I still feel reluctant to try it all. I still can't tell you what I'm waiting for. But none of that matters. While it looks like there have been setbacks in my situation, while I have met resistance, while it looks like things are never going to work out, I know God's called me to this. And if that's the case, then he's going to make a way. He told Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. He offers the same encouragement for us. Replace Pharaoh with your situation. Now you will see how I will get you through this. Now you will see how I will provide for you. Now you will see how I will make the impossible possible. But it's how he will do it, not how we will do it. Moses still had to go to Pharaoh. Moses still had to perform miracles and confront a very powerful man. But at the end of the day, God made a way. We do our part. We answer the calling to a seemingly impossible situation, and God will show up. God has told me time and time again that his promise is going to come true. I still don't see it. But what I do see is that it's God's mountain to move. And let me tell you, when he finally comes through, when his promise finally sees the light, the story is going to be legendary. You may be reluctant to answer the calling that God has put on your life, but know that it could be a legendary calling to answer. Did you know that even Jesus was reluctant to some extent? The night before he was betrayed, he prayed to God and asked that if there be any other way to take his calling from him, to take his calling to die on the cross for our sins and make another way. Because he knew the pain he would endure. He knew that the people would mock him. He didn't want to go through that. But in the end, he knew there was no other way, because it was his calling. So despite his fear, he went to the cross anyway. He didn't let his weakness be his limit. so that you and I could have the strength of God to carry us through life, so that you and I could go free from the penalty of death. And because of that, we have this legendary story to read and learn from. Let's pray, guys. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much, Lord, God, for these legendary examples you've given us in the Bible, these people that are just so relatable, God, these people with imperfections just like us, people with insecurities and fears, God, that you still used for amazing things. God, would you help the reluctant heroes? God, anyone who's afraid to answer the calling that you have put in their life, God, would you give them strength? God, would you assure them that you are with them, that their weakness is not their limit, that even if they're facing resistance, that it is still their calling. God, would you help them? God, would you provide support to those who need help in their calling, those who need reinforcements, resources, whatever it might be? God, would you help them carry out their calling? God, I pray you would use these people, these reluctant heroes, everyone here watching and listening. God, I pray you'd use them for legendary purposes. God, would you help us to overcome the weaknesses in ourselves, God, not by our own power, but by your power. You will make a way. I pray you'd help us all do that, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.